Well, tonight we're going to start a new series. We're going to start a series going through the book of Judges. And I hope this will be a good study for you, an encouraging study. It's always, to me, been an interesting book to go through. And so we're just going to take our time. And in fact, I may have too much material. And tonight is nothing but introduction. We're not even really going to get started, but just to look through it. But that's what we're going to do. And just as a reminder, it always seems to me that key verse comes from chapter 17 and verse 6, where in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Of course, it's a cyclical book. It's repetition, but it's pretty personal and applicable to all of us, because what is exemplary in Judges is applicatory to the Christian, the modern day Christian. Same thing kind of happens. Now, as we look through this, we're going to, like I said, we're just going to be looking at the introduction. And just to kind of give you a little bit at least, that we're talking about 300 years of Israel's history here. It's about how long it covers. I'm going to give you my overall outline, and that for the whole book. Of course, there's a lot of subpoints, but there's only three primary or main points. And number one, we'll look at the failure observed. And that kind of is going to cover from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 3 and verse 6, where you have the first judge kind of rolls in. Well, we're going to, and you can kind of name these whatever to your fancy is and what you summarize it as, but pay attention to how it's divided, because I don't think you can change those divisions up too much. From chapter 1 to chapter 3 and verse 6 is how it works. Then in number 2, I believe we have the Lord raised up, and I'm not talking about raising the Lord up, but the Lord raised up. He raised up judges. And that covers from chapter 3 and verse 7 all the way to chapter 16 and the final verse in that chapter, verse 31. That is the bulk of the book. And it really is the area which, other than maybe the first part's very much chronological. But you're going to see when you get to that last part, which I call it the prevailing principle, which kind of deals with that verse that I gave to you right at the beginning. And that goes from chapter 17, very first verse, to the last chapter and the last verse. And that one is really... This is a book where, again, I don't think that's chronological. When you look at the last section there, that's telling you about the whole spirit of what they were like and what was going on with them. This is going to be a long introduction, and we're going to kind of go back too, because I want to pay attention to the fact that as we look through this, this has to do with the nation of Israel and how they complain, how that they are governed. You have to go back to Abraham, to Isaac, Jacob, where you had patriarchal leaders. Then you go to the 12 tribes and their divinely chosen leader who presided over elders and chiefs and officers. That, of course, was Moses. Then it goes from Moses to Joshua, then from Joshua to Judah, and from Judah, then we get into the judges. That's what you're going to find out about this. When you look at this, it's really, that's why I said your government is important to understand a little bit to get a picture of it, because, of course, they were a patriarchy first, then they're a theocracy with the judges second, and they don't like that, so they end up going for a monarchy after that with Saul first and then David. So that's kind of the way that they were governed. And we're going to learn that this theocracy, the whole thing was of God's design. It's very much a compelling book. And you look into the tribes of Israel after the death of Joshua, who was their leader after Moses. And all of what they did really disturbed and changed their rule of government and their behavior. Moses, if you remember, had been divinely appointed by God to be their liberator, to be their leader, to be their mediator between God and the people, and between God and, I should say, between, even Moses was a mediator between Israel and the other nations, in particular Egypt. When we start looking, the first thing that I'll tell you, this is a transitional government. Even though it's 300 years, approximately the time frame that's in there, you're talking about a great deal of time that's involved. And how did all this start first off? One of the things, if you remember, the family grew. They were down in Egypt. They were enslaved. And then God chose Moses to lead them out. So we learned from Exodus 3 and 10 where God said, come now, this is God speaking. Therefore, and he's speaking to Moses, come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children, out of Israel. And you remember, too, that the characteristic of how God spoke to Moses was this characterized as face-to-face. Very intimate conversations with him. Moses then was told to gather together all of the elders and explain how that God was going to use him and liberate them through his leadership. And he would, as Exodus 3 also states, verse 17, that he would lead them unto a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, after leaving Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and entering into a barren wilderness, God gave them instructions and directions of how to conduct themselves as a chosen nation. God used Moses to institute a system of government for Israel, which even then was a theocracy. The government provided a civil format as well as a religious or ecclesiastical format. Both of them centered themselves under the rule of God. Moses was given this overwhelming responsibility. And Moses, the reason why I'm picking this up, you'll find that Moses judged the people. In other words, when there was a matter of discrepancy or disagreement, then they brought the problems to Moses, and Moses, if needed to, he would bring those things before God. And it became a real burden to him. The lines got really, really long. And so Jethro, when he comes back into the scene, bringing Moses' daughter, or Moses' wife, I should say, because Jethro was his father-in-law, he even mentioned that the fact that people are standing from morning till evening. So he suggested something to Moses that he would divide, or he should divide, the duties among qualified men. He says that way it's not going to wear you out. Because if you keep this up, you're not going to last very long. And so he suggested they do that. Exodus 18:21 says that, told them to choose out able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. And that they would, those men that would help him, would judge the small matters, and every great matter they shall bring to thee. So this would kind of preserve Moses' health and longevity and his strength, and it would help them to be more efficient and effective in their order. As time progressed, Moses, of course, we know because of his striking the rock the second time instead of speaking to the rock, he was unable to go into the promised land. He was unable to lead them into the land flowing with milk and honey. So in Numbers 27 and verse 28, we learn about Joshua. That's why I said it's a transition. We go from Moses to Joshua. And what do we learn about him? And Joshua, Deuteronomy 34 and verse 9 says, And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. We even see in Numbers 27 and verse 18 that he was told to lay his hands upon Joshua. He was supposed to do it in front of the entire congregation. So the leadership of Israel was transferred to Joshua in a very solemn ceremony before all of the people. Joshua then ended up leading them into the covenant land, and they respected and followed Joshua. After we follow and see this in Deuteronomy 34:9, let me take you to Joshua 1:1, where it says, Now after the death of Moses, servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people in the land which I do give them, even to the children of Israel. Just reading this so that you know the leadership that they had was divinely appointed. God raised up, he chose Moses. Moses led for a lot of years. Joshua led for a lot of years. And God would be with Joshua just like he was with Moses. He led him and he led Israel, and he oversaw, Joshua did, the government of Israel, which included, and I'm not going to get into all the details here, but it included elders, their heads, judges, and officers as well. But now we get to the part when Joshua is now 110 years old. He begins to gather them together, and you might even remember this, that he charged Israel to make a choice. And this was when he was ready to die, but he makes the point of telling them, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he made a covenant with the people. It was written down, this agreement, this covenant, and he took a stone to be a witness of that event. He said, this stone heard it. Now we're putting this up. It'll be a reminder. And notice is made in also Joshua 24 and verse 31. It says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. Now again, that's why I said this is a transitional generation. Even though we say they listened to Moses, we know how often they didn't. We know how often God threatened to destroy them under Moses. And kind of the same as Israel, with Joshua, but you can see there is a difference. Now we get into a very forgetful generation. In Judges chapter 2 and verse 10, after the death of Joshua, and after the death of that generation that was a witness to some of these things, all of a sudden there arose another generation. It says also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers. They died. And there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. It seems like you get a little bit further away from the witness and the testimony of the work of the Lord, and all of a sudden you get to people who have no experience. And they're not believers like some of the others were. Whether they truly believed or all or not, I don't know, but the result was a drastic change in the culture and really in the chaos that existed in Israel. Go to the very next verse, verse 11. It says, And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served Balaam. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. they just forgot everything. I get to wonder sometimes about Baptists. Baptist churches everywhere, to me, are shrinking. The faithful are seemingly few and getting fewer still. How is it that people can leave what we understand to be a church, one of the few churches that teach about how a church began, how a church perpetuates itself, and how it exists? The fact that the church started during the personal ministry of Jesus Christ, not on Pentecost, is a huge difference between Protestants and Catholics. I mean, a lot of people, when you talk about church history, they think it's Catholic history. When I talk about church history, I'm looking back and noticing Baptist history. They may not be called Baptist, but they have the same doctrine, and we can chase them down and follow them. If you look at some of the other things, then we start looking and finding there's a disobedient generation. The judges, there's a real problem here. God would use these other nations to chasten them. They would cry out for deliverance, and God would raise up a judge. I mean, they became really unfaithful in a lot of situations. In verse 16, you see it. Nevertheless, even though they followed after other gods, God would raise up judges which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. Now remember, how did they get in that predicament? Because they became unfaithful. We're going to see how that they had a problem with rain, how that they had droughts. Why did that come about? It's part of the chastening hand of God to provoke them, to straighten them up. Israel would fail to listen to the leader God had raised up, and they would turn quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in. Verse 19, it came to pass when the judge was dead that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, and following other gods to serve them and to bow down to them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. The whole book is about this cycle that they are going through. They would forsake the Lord. A nation would come in that was around them and take them captive. They would oppress them. They would cry to the Lord. God would raise up a judge. He would deliver them. They would enjoy great peace. And then after the judge died, they would forsake the Lord, be taken captive again, cry again, and on and on and on that cycle goes. God promised them prosperity and protection if they obeyed. He also promised them trouble and vexation if they disobeyed. The problem was, really, there was a rise of human preeminence. That's why I use that verse in chapter 17 and verse 6, that in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. I'm preeminent. That's the problem. Instead of freedom and faithfulness from God's chosen nation, we see failure and unfaithfulness. Instead of deciding to serve the Lord, they began to follow after Baal. And even if they don't completely abandon the worship of God, they are mixing together the false religion with the true, which is, you're polluting it all. So when God fulfills his promise of vexation for their disobedience, what do? They repent and they cry unto the Lord. He remembers his covenant, has mercy on them, raises a judge up, and on and on. It's not much different than what happens with us as Christians, that we can forget what the Lord has done for us. We can get casual. We can begin to get worldly. And God's got to bring the chastening rod in and correct us. Then we start crying, oh, Lord, deliver me. And he does. And then we get comfortable. We go through a period of peace. Well, what are we looking at then? We're looking at really a corrupt generation. As we read through this book, we will learn that a judge was a temporary deliverer. There was really no official office, no national army. He wore no crown, and there was never any successor. There wasn't any successor. As long as the judge lived, Israel prospered. If they followed and listened to the judge. Israel prospered because the judge destroyed the enemy from their land and gave them guidance and judged them. But once that judge died, well, let me show you some other verses here. In chapter, I pass it up already? Let me read, I don't think I read verse 20 of Judges chapter 2. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. And he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died. Now, but I want you to pay attention, because you ever wonder why God didn't just get rid of your old flesh entirely? I mean, God saved you and made you a new creature, but he left that old stinking flesh in there, which is always at war with you. You ever wonder why? Learn something from this next verse. He said he didn't destroy all the enemies that were in that land, that through them I may prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it, or not. Therefore, the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. You see, our old nature is our enemy. God did not destroy the flesh, but it fights against us and will until the day that we die. But Israel learned something falsely, that's not the right word. They had some fault in how they were learning. They learned to live with their enemy. But listen, so do you. You learn to live with your enemy because the enemy is you. It's your flesh. You need to pay attention to that. The whole point is God's teaching us we have to learn how to fight. You know that? That's what he did with Israel. He's teaching them how to fight. And we can use that as we go through this to learn how to fight ourselves. But we also have to learn differently. Israel learned to live with their enemy, and the enemy ended up learning how to conquer Israel and to corrupt Israel. You see, Israel made covenants with the enemy, and Israel tolerated their idolatry. They ended up corrupting themselves because of their own disobedience. So we need to learn from their personal stories. They were told not to tolerate these heathen nations. Again, they were left there that they might test or prove Israel. And it seems quite clear that, don't you think, if you were to give them a grade, what kind of grade would you give them? A passing one or a failing one? I think they failed the test, don't you? God had tested Israel in the wilderness, and now he's going to test them in the land of Canaan. This book exposes the violence and the moral corruption of the nation of Israel. Even in the greatest hero of Judges, there is found corruption. Doesn't matter how great the judge is, you're going to find some corruption. Gideon, Samson, we all know Samson had some problems, don't we? Even Gideon, he made an ephod, and we are told that became a snare unto Gideon and his house. Chapter 8, verse 27. The cycle of corruption was real then and it's real now for us. And even the best of God's servants still have an old corrupt nature that must constantly be kept in check. So don't get too haughty. Don't get too high-minded. Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. I mean, Samson's weakness was obvious. And it shows us the more that we tolerate our enemy, the more familiar we become with our enemy's corruptions, the more dangerous it is for us. Israel tolerated the nations that God commanded them to move. And yet God said, I'm going to use them to try you. They made arrangements with them. They intermarried with them. They allowed their idolatry. And they soon joined in, even in serving Baal. The cycles of depravity and corruption that we see are a lesson that we need to learn so that we may overcome the same problems in our lives. Sadly, seeing the cycle doesn't necessarily bring the ability to break the cycle. A lot of people get addicted to certain things in their life, and they know they're addicted. Just because you know that you're addicted and it's a problem doesn't give you the key to get rid of it. The key might be altogether different. That's why, lastly, we're going to look at this as a very ignorant generation. Sadly, there's a lot of Christians that are ignorant of the Bible. They don't study the Word of God. In the latter chapters, you're going to find a recurring phrase that is mentioned, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 times at least. Chapter 17, 18, 19, and chapter 21, where there was no king in Israel. That's mentioned. That's why, again, in that last part of that verse that we see in chapter 17 and verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. The other times that we're going to see examples of human depravity, corrupt morals, and really ignorance, and they stand out. Some have inferred from this that Israel needed a monarchy, and they will say it, we need a monarchy to be like all the rest of the nations. In other words, if we have a king and we have a succession of kings, we'd never be without a king, and so it's going to be better off for us. I'll tell you, a lot of people find great comfort in legalistic behavior. Being told what to do is a lot easier than learning how to listen to the Holy Spirit on a day-to-day basis. They like rules. Give me those rules. I'm very comfortable with it. Now, I know if I'm spiritual. Problem is, a lot of times you follow those rules, you're not spiritual at all. You're doing it in the power of the flesh. Again, if they have such a king, evil deeds will be restrained for fear of the king. They thought they identified the problem, but they did not. You know, they think someone needs to rule over me constantly, and we kind of get that idea that somebody needs to rule, but the ruler needs to be Jesus, not other men, not even a church, not a pastor. I don't rule over you, and I shouldn't. I serve you, but I give you wisdom from God's word. Israel had, even when they felt like they couldn't depend upon the judges because they weren't leaving an heir as a future leader. If you remember, when Gideon came along, they tried to make Gideon king, and they tried to create a monarchy from his family. And they even asked in Judges 8 and verse 22, it said, "Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son and thy son's sons also." But Gideon, in great wisdom, gave them the right choice for their leader. Quote, "The Lord shall rule over you." See, the problem isn't answered by us submitting to a man. Same thing when we teach our children, that we train them and we discipline them. What are we disciplining them for? So they can learn to discipline themselves. we need to learn how to discipline ourselves. The problem is one of the heart. And the only answer for that is a new heart. That's what God gives to us. And again, we need to see the problem isn't found in organization. It isn't found in a new social order or a new arrangement. It's found in a new relationship. The problem of Israel was forgetting the covenant they'd made with the Lord, and they continued to violate that covenant. Man, I'm not going to get anywhere close to finishing this one. Well, let me skip through some of this here. What they needed and what we need is to be obedient and to trust in the Lord and drive out the remaining inhabitants. Consider yourself, reckon ye yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin. That's how you drive out the inhabitants. You got to crucify them on the cross of Calvary. Who are you crucifying? You, yourself, the lust of the flesh. That's what you're doing. Now, we need King Jesus, of course, to subdue our fleshly appetites and crush our own rebellious heart and to drive out those inhabitants. And we need to also see that God used both good men and bad men to deliver Israel. But ultimately, it is always God and not the man who delivers. Gideon, as an example, again, wasn't some great general with a fantastic mind for battle planning. He dismissed the bulk of his army right off the bat. Not because he thought it was wise, but because God told him to. He got it down to where I'm sure if he looked around, he said, we're dead meat. He only took a few men, and he won against a superior army because he trusted and obeyed God. Yet, those same men, instead of seeking God who gave them the victory, they saw only Gideon, and they sought to make him the first king. But it was the sword of the Lord that won the battle. And it is the Lord who will win every battle that we must fight. I'm going to have to quit there. I was going to get into, this mixed generation. I think I'll give you at least the list, and then we'll come back and look at this next week. I'm going to give you where they're found, the judges that are listed. And some say that there are 12. Some will say there's a less number. Some will go up to even more than say there's 17. I'm going to give you a list of 12. Some of these judges are seen in great detail along with their enemies and even the numbers of years that Israel was oppressed and then the number of years in which they lived in peace. Some are named. Some tribes are listed. Some, again, their length of service and maybe even mention of their families, then their death, and that's it. But some, you only know that they were raised up a judge, they lived, they died. That's it. That's all you get. Othniel is found in, well, I'm not going to give you the scriptures. Ehud's next, Shamgar is there, Deborah, Gideon, and some will make Abimelech, which is in Judges chapter 9, one of the judges. He is listed in that order. I won't put him in that because they tried to make himself king. Very different. I think there's a problem with that. Then you have Tola. Then you have Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and finally Samson. Now, those are the scriptures, and we'll get into them a little bit more. And you'll see again from chapter 17 to the end of the book in chapter 21, it seems to me that it's outside of the chronology, and it's more of a understanding of the whole displacement or the characteristic of the people that you can read about in that particular time. It reveals the rise of idolatry, immorality, and goes further. We're going to stop there. I'm not done with the introduction, but we'll get into that next week. I don't want to keep you any longer than that. And I hope that you'll be interested in studying with this with me. I just have probably a page or page and a half again of information to go with this, and then we'll get into the first chapter. But if you remember, first chapter from chapter 1 to chapter 3, not about the judges. It's going to get into again about the character of Israel. And then at the end of it, it's also about the character, the immorality, the idolatry, and some of the other things, as well as what we read in here. So I hope this will be interesting to you. Read along with me and study with me, and hope you'll enjoy it and learn from it.